Do you sometimes wish we had a time machine to go back in time and witness the events of the Bible? Well, I sure do, and we have the periodic table of history, and we will do just that, try to get the best visual picture that we can that's realistic of the first missionary journey of Paul. We study history in 4 dimensions here, so let's take a look at that realistic view using the world map. We're going to zoom in on that Mediterranean location, and you can see red and blue here. Red is the line of Paul's missionary journey on outbound, and blue is the returning situation. Now we're going to resituate this map so that we can understand it when we zoom in, just like we were taking a little airplane and flying over this. Maybe we have our little Cessna that we can look at this journey from. Remember, Paul's birthplace is right over here in Turkey. And we have 2 Antiochs that we will visit. Be sure not to get confused with those. We have the Antioch here in the Levant, and then there's another Antioch in the basin in Turkey. So now we will situate ourselves right here at the Antioch church, looking out over what could be. That's what everybody is always thinking. Also, we would like to get our mind wrapped around the time element, so let's go to our periodic table of history right here and notice that we have 6,000 years of time, and we would get to Benjamin Netanyahu, go all the way back to Protestant Reformation, go back to the Knights Templar, and we can get all the way back to the time of Constantinople in about 300 with the 320s in Rome, and then find our way back to Paul right here. And I'll put an arrow on that so we know that this is the scope of time. Time is probably 46 AD, maybe 47, 48, right in there. And then we have the Council of Jerusalem at 49 AD. The reading is Acts 13 and 14, so be sure to familiarize yourself with those 2 chapters. I highly encourage that. In Acts 13, we find out that the church, Paul and Barnabas, have been fasting, and they're chosen to go on this missionary journey. So let's get back to our map and fly through it as if we had a little Cessna airplane. See, here is Antioch and here's Seleucia. Those are mentioned in the text, and we have a couple people here, and maybe John right here also. So Paul, Barnabas, and maybe John right here. You can imagine some of the things that are going on at this time. The church is worried about the future. It's thinking about how it can expand, how it can fulfill the Great Commission. The people of the Mediterranean are very good with boats. They know how to get around in this area. And they were launched off from Seleucia. They were probably looking up at the mountains when they left, and they probably saw dolphins while they were on their boat traveling over to Cyprus. And that would have been fabulous. So now let's go on this journey and travel over towards Cyprus. This is what they would have seen. Now notice this very open bay. This is a really good place to find yourself if you're a captain. And let's get ourselves familiarized with Cyprus. We have 2 mountain ranges, one in the north and one in the south. So this midsection is quite open, and we see that Salamis is mentioned in Acts 13. Paul usually went to the synagogue, but we can imagine that there were the typical seagulls and things that you would see at a shipping community. And you can also imagine Paul going through the markets. And of course, going through the bustling cities to his favorite destination at the synagogue. He loved going to the synagogue. That was the center for everything. It was the center for culture, for news, for everything that you would find. The people at the synagogues would pass information back and forth. There'd probably be notes on the doors. So that was kind of like your modern internet, with the information just flowing through there, like that was the first world from 2,000 years ago. Well, we can get more acquainted with this. It would have been real easy to bump around this area in a boat. So look at those beautiful mountain ranges and the mountains that Paul would have looked up from his small vessel. There's an interesting story about a sorcerer named Bar-Jesus here, also Elymas. And this is about at Acts 13:6. Well, this is Paphos. This is where you would launch off to get anywhere in the western part of the Mediterranean. And there was quite a stir there with the sorcerer who ended up being blind. The people really had to think about the events that happened when Paul passed through there. And then he's on his way again by boat. They would have come across the coast of Perga, Pamphylia. So we're going to do that right now. He's slowly going across this Mediterranean Sea and arrives here at Pamphylia. Notice when we change our perspective that we're looking at some pretty ominous mountains to the north. And this is where John departed. We don't know the details about that. But you would have had all these typical marketplace scenes, these people mending their nets, the fishermen displaying the catch of the day. Paul went to the synagogue here also, and he was actually accepted by some of the Jews and some of the Gentiles, but some of the Jews did not accept him. They did not think that Jesus was the Messiah here. But when he went to the great Colosseum and started preaching, and more Gentiles and Jews were there with him, you can imagine that there is kind of a church envy that's going on at this point. So they move along. John leaves, and you have the two of them, Paul and Barnabas, now getting over this mountain range. And this is a beautiful area. All that water is just flowing out of these mountains. Every time it rains, that water is pouring off these steep sides of the mountains. It is amazing. Gotta get some higher elevation, and we can see that terrain that Paul probably went through. As you pass people, you can always get advice of what's up ahead. Some people talking to each other as they pass, and some people keeping silent. There would have been many different languages. And we can see another lake that Paul passed. This would be a likely route so that we could get over here to Antioch of Pisidia. And that's what I was talking about before. This is the Antioch in the arid mountain region versus the Antioch that we started out with in southern Turkey. This place is pretty interesting because there's an archaeological area here that shows a Colosseum and an ancient civilization. It is very beautiful, and if you're in this area, definitely check this out. There's a mound here, but look at this gorgeous Colosseum. Judging by the size of this, Paul probably was acquainted with this area. There would have been a synagogue. There were different quarters where different people groups stayed. Here's an area here. Here's the Colosseum. Here's another area. You're going to have an agora, some type of market. Another area. And Paul seemed to preach to the people and to the leaders of an area. He tried to get the leadership involved wherever he went. But look at that gorgeous mound and that gorgeous Colosseum. So there are definitely some scenes here of Paul and Barnabas talking with the people, reasoning with the people. And Paul and Barnabas are expelled. The religious people are not really thinking that this new idea is necessarily what they want. But we don't see a whole lot of drama at this point. But city to city, the religious leaders are getting worried now. Because they can think, well, maybe this guy is leaving and hopefully he's gone for good, but they will find out that he wasn't gone for good. He makes his way through these mountain ranges. Not too bad. Oh, let's get a little bit of distance too. We're over here at Iconium too. And the next place we're going to go to is Lystra. But let's get a ruler down here and we can see the distance. Something like maybe 60 miles from Iconium to Lystra. So that is the scale that we are on. And we're up here in Acts 13:51. Paul and Barnabas, they find out about a plot to stone them. Even though there's a lot of miracles that are being rendered in this area, still there's lots of skepticism here also. And Paul and Barnabas learn about the plot and they move on. But every place they're going, the religious people that didn't believe in Jesus from where they came from, they are getting more and more worried about this situation. But Paul makes his way across here. Let's change our view just slightly and we can see what's on the horizon. If you were walking across here, these are the mountains that you would see. Lystra is that city that the crippled man was healed. So signs and wonders are happening in this area as well. And check out the region. You can see some amazing landmarkers here. This conical structure here, these mountain columns here, and the mountains in the distance. But this is the place where Paul is called Mercurius and Barnabas is called Jupiter. And that's in Acts 14. The cities catch up to Paul here. And Paul is stoned here. So amazingly, he gets up from that. And he had to have some kind of drive to keep on going. But he goes on. He goes across this plain, and you can see all those mountains in the background. And something fun about this is just on the other side of the mountains is Tarsus, where Paul grew up. So we can go up here, look at how there's a lot of fertile land here. Let's gain some altitude. And right on the other side of the mountain, see, that's where Tarsus is. And Antioch is way back there on the top right of the screen. But now we get to Acts 14:20. This is Derbe. It's a very mountainous city. So it probably looked like any of the semi-arid kind of places, really tucked away. People here are trying to get away from everybody, getting away from society that's let them down. And so this would be a poorer area that doesn't have that resource of trading, not a wealthy place. The people are ruggedly independent, but probably didn't have very much. So now let's look back. We're going to gain some altitude here. Look back. I'm going to show the return tracks. They're in blue. But you can see where we came from out here. Paul going through the mountains way out on the horizon, coming through Iconium and Lystra, and now up here to Derbe in Acts 14:20. And now we just have the return tracks. He could have gone back the same exact way, or here's an alternate route that's similar but different. And Paul was always interested in what happened after he was at a certain place. And look at those landmarks back there I was telling you about before. They're just like clumps of mountains in the middle of this plain. And there's that very conical mountain right there. So he's returning to Lystra. Wow. What kind of drive. Now he actually saw Jesus Christ, so I think that was his drive. Anyone who has seen Jesus is never the same again. And he was always talking about running the race with endurance. So he learned a lot of lessons in this land. This is his first missionary journey. Since he wasn't killed in that first stoning, he just kept on going. And then he's back at Iconium. Now remember, this Iconium had the religious zealots that were so zealous they would go 60 miles across this plain so they could get to the other city and cause trouble for Paul. And the other people, like they're even farther back. Let's see how far away they are. I'm going to gain elevation and we can just about see Antioch. Yeah, there it is. Do you see it in the background? Here's Iconium. I'm clicking around it. Here's the mountain range you have to go through. And then here's Antioch. So let's find the distance on there. We'll go there to, well, for there, see, that's over 60 miles. If we get a good data point, yeah, see, probably about 80 miles. 80 miles as the crow flies. So Paul is going to make his way back through this rugged land. But it's mountainous. There would be springs through here. There would be little waterfalls. Some of the people accepted him. Some of them rejected him. And this would be a pretty good route. Everybody passing by would say, just set your sights on the white mountain in the background and keep walking. And Antioch is the other place that caused him a whole lot of problems. They went a long way out of their way to cause problems. And that's that beautiful area that has that archaeological dig with the Colosseum. So we're back here. Paul would have been on that mound. And now he knows he can get back to the Mediterranean Sea. He has to find his way through this beautiful lake area, which is what he did. We don't get any specifics of where he went to, only that he went to the land of Pisidia in Acts 14:24. But the deer and people figure out the most efficient path through these places. Deer and antelope, whatever that goes through here, as they walk, they're going to leave paths. And those paths are going to be very efficient. So probably a lot of the paths that we see today are still the same efficient pathways now as before. Wow, this is a gorgeous area. Look at those gorgeous mountains. So Paul made his way out here. Everything that he was trying to do, he was going to give those people. He was going to help teaching. Remember, people didn't have the literacy like they have now. So the scribes would have been copying the Torah over and over, and anybody that had the Word of God was greatly appreciated. And just like you read through these chapters, Acts 13 and 14, usually Paul would go into the synagogue and the people there would say, "Give us the news. Tell us what's going on." Well, Perga is one of the places that Paul gets back to, encourages the people there. And it's interesting that then he goes off to this other city. It's interesting because it's a decent little ways away, and it seems like he could have just gone over there. But let's find out how far that is. Something like maybe 35 or 40 miles. Paul goes from Perga. He's back here on the Mediterranean. He's back with what he knows, which is he was a mender of nets. So he knows about sails. He knows about tying knots. Well, he goes back to Attalia, a place that you can actually visit nowadays by just about the same name. And that's in Acts 14:25. And there is that beautiful Mediterranean coast again. All the sights of the sea would be here. After all those experiences, after the lame person by birth was healed, after the priest of Zeus was just about to make Paul and Barnabas heroes and gods because of whatever attributes, and then they were ready to stone him. Now Paul and Barnabas are headed back to Antioch of the Levant in southern Turkey. And they're riding the ocean along these beautiful mountains of southern Turkey. Here's the widest stretch of ocean. And what would Paul have been saying in this time? What would Paul have been doing? He would have been praying and praising God like crazy, is what I think. Now look at that gorgeous harbor. It has that beautiful mountain over in the south. A sight for sore eyes. And Paul is so happy after his first missionary journey, he has to go on more. Well, now he has all these stories to encourage the churches with. And this is what starts setting him into writing and encouraging and sending those letters back to the churches that he has established. Now look here to the south. This is the Levant coast. And so the end of this missionary journey is Paul going down here. We're going to pass Tyre and Sidon. Now, is this Sidon? I think that is Sidon. And then, remember, Herod the Great wanted to honor Caesar and made an amazing harbor for trading. And that was outside the coast, out from Jerusalem. There was Jerusalem in the background. Paul made it to the Council of Jerusalem in somewhere like 49 AD. And here is that city of Jerusalem. can see the Dead Sea in the background. And the Dome of the Rock is right here. Right here, I will click around it. And the Dead Sea out there in the background. Okay, so there was that first missionary journey. You can go right through Acts 13 and 14 and get acquainted with all that area. And it's kind of like we can go on our Mediterranean cruise, but we fly through it and we do it a lot more efficiently with our periodic table of history time machine. All right, so now we are well acquainted with Turkey and the Levant and what Paul went through and the area that he faced when he was doing that first missionary journey. We can also demythify ourselves and get a much more realistic view of what happened in Acts 13 and 14. I really enjoyed this study and I'm glad you're here. Thank you a lot and have a great week. I'll see you in the next video. The Lord bless you.